Hi there, welcome. I'm Crystal from livingwithgastroparesis.com. In this video, I am going to be telling you all about my hike from the top of the Grand Canyon to the bottom and back up again, and the things that I learned that I think are really helpful for anybody living with gastroparesis, whether or not you plan to do any sort of crazy adventure like this. So stay tuned. All right, so it's been just about a year since I did this hike. It was November 2022, and I thought it was definitely time that I share some of what I kind of saw and learned over the process that I think is so applicable to living well with gastroparesis. Again, having nothing to do with, hiking or the outdoors or anything like that, but my focus lately has really been on, not just living or living well with gastroparesis, but on like thriving with gastroparesis, on living a really full, engaged life where you're doing things that you enjoy, things that like light you up and just give you pleasure, and not just, focusing on a management plan and kind of living for symptom management. And so that was definitely this for me. This was a huge bucket list activity. It's something I wanted to do for a long time. And it really reminded me like how capable, how resilient we all are. And, we can do hard things. So I trained for about 6 months for this hike. And right off the bat, I will say that that was a really conscious choice, because the kind of training that I had to do, which was, walking for long periods of time at very high inclines, is not what we would consider like gastroparesis friendly activity, right? Those aren't things that are going to help manage your symptoms. So walking is a huge part of my management plan, but that's mild to moderate activity, walking on primarily a flat surface for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. So this kind of physical activity that I was doing was not, it wasn't really helpful, honestly, when it came to symptom management. And I could feel a difference doing that kind of activity versus, like I said, the mild to moderate physical activity that I am doing currently and have done for a long time, going for, a 20 to 30-minute walk after I eat. But that's okay. And I think this is like the first thing I want to point out, that just because something is not gastroparesis friendly, or it's not necessarily conducive to symptom management, it doesn't mean you can't do it. If it's something that's really important to you, if it's something that really is going to bring you joy, I just released a new program called Thriving with Gastroparesis, and it's really all about kind of creating this full, joyful life with gastroparesis. And one of the things I talked about, both when it comes to diet and when it comes to lifestyle, is, guidelines for symptom management are just guidelines. They're just offerings. They are not mandates. And if there is something that is really important in your life that contradicts those guidelines, it doesn't mean that those can't be in your life, right? There are usually gastroparesis friendly ways that you can incorporate them. So, for example, with my training hikes, I did those as early in the day as possible, like typically kind of first thing in the morning, because I know that I don't feel as well doing those things as the day goes on. I can't have eaten, a bigger meal and then go do some kind of strenuous activity. Like that does not work for me. And so I would have what's my normal breakfast, which is, usually like a macro bar. So something fairly light, and then do my workout. And then I would be hungry again after, because I just did a really strenuous, pretty long workout. And then I would eat a little more, substantial, like well-balanced gastroparesis friendly meal. And so, I did watch my diet a little more closely while I was training. I did use some other symptom management tools. Like it's not an either or. It's not, I'm going to do this thing that maybe takes me outside of my symptom management plan, or I'm going to be super strict in my symptom management plan and do nothing outside of that, right? It could be and. You can do both. And you can do things intentionally. And Again, I talk a lot about that in the new program, but I just want to put that out there because right from the get-go, this was strenuous activity, not the typical mild to moderate that I would suggest and say is gastroparesis friendly. Now, I think the other piece that kind of made that easier for me, which again, so much of the new program is about, is I am not afraid of gastroparesis anymore. There was a time where I was very afraid of my symptoms and of my experience of gastroparesis, and I wanted nothing in the world more than for this thing to go away. Um, and that's why I, had an incredibly tight grip on symptom management, and I would not veer from my symptom management plan, from my dietary stuff, from my lifestyle stuff, because I was so afraid of experiencing gastroparesis. And just super far from, where I am now. Like, I am not afraid of my experience. I'm not afraid of symptoms. I know so just truly and fully that everything changes, and my experience right now in this moment is not going to be my experience in the next moment, and that I am capable to handle anything I experience from moment to moment. And so again, I keep talking about the program just because it's so relevant to this, but um yeah, I think that was a huge piece of it for me. I think if I had been really afraid of like experiencing symptoms, it would have been much more difficult to make this decision to do the hike and train for the hike in the first place. So I guess one last time, I won't keep talking about this, I promise. But if you are in a place where there are things you want to be doing in your life, where there are things that would bring you joy, and it feels like you can't do them right now because you are in that place where you are just so scared of gastroparesis and gastroparesis symptoms, and of not having that really tight grip of control on symptom management, please do check out the program. I will link it in the description below, because truly that's what it's all about. And that's what allowed me to do like this amazing bucket list adventure. Okay, so for the hike itself, when we finally got time to do that, first of all, I intentionally did not like bite off more than I thought I might be able to chew. So we hiked, I did this with my husband. We hiked to the bottom one day, stayed the night. There are cabins at the bottom of the Grand Canyon at a place called Phantom Ranch. And then we hiked out the next day. So it's there are two different trails. The one we took, it was about 8 miles down and then about 10 miles out. I knew that if I didn't feel well at any point, you know, and down is optional, but up is mandatory, right? And so it could have been a really unpleasant experience if I had tried to do more than I think what we did. Again, like, you can do things that initially might seem like things you wouldn't do with gastroparesis, but you still want to do them intentionally, and you want to set yourself up for success. So I did not bite off more than I could chew. We stayed the night at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I guess if anybody's curious, I carried gastroparesis friendly food, things that work well for me. Definitely, I was not going to try any new food on the hike, right? Um, you want to set yourself up for success, right? So things that work well for you. So I did Nature Valley granola bars work really well for me. Macro bars work really well for me. When you're hiking, you want like fat, you want protein, you want sugar to kind of keep things going. So I did like some fat-free gummies. I did so like peanut butter and nut butters are a really common thing for hiking because they do have fat and they have protein. But I know that more than, a spoonful or two of nut butter like sits heavy in my stomach. And so I did PB2, which is powdered peanut butter. It's mostly defatted, and did a lot of that because that's still got the protein. It's got a little bit of fat. Um, so I made really conscious decisions about the food that I was bringing. You also want salty foods, right? Because you're sweating a lot. You need the sweat. I mean, you need the salt for your electrolytes. And so I brought things that I know work for me. So like lentil chips, which are a little lower in fat than potato chips. I did bring some like puffed potato chips because I just really like them. And those are actually one thing that was a little higher in fat. And So I was just cognizant with those. I wasn't going to eat the entire Ziploc bag that I brought of those at one time. I ate those over the course of the 2 days, and, a little bit at a time. So just being really cognizant. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon at Phantom Ranch, they do have a canteen where you can get food. I wasn't going to be able to like bring enough food for dinner. I knew I was going to want a hot meal. We did a ton of physical activity that day. It was very cold for most of our hike down. And so I knew I was going to want a hot meal. So I chose kind of, again, intentionally. So they had an option of a steak dinner or beef stew. And so I chose beef stew because I knew I'd be able to eat the carrots out of it. I'd be able to eat the potatoes out of it and maybe a couple of bites of the beef, which beef stew is good, right? In that like the beef is cooked a long time. It tends to be pretty tender. The broth looked pretty oily and fatty to me, so I didn't really eat the broth. I knew I was going to be having, you order in advance, so I knew I was going to be having the stew at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So I brought cornbread from home that I make that I know works really well for me. It's, gluten-free and lower in fat. And so I brought some of that so that I could have that with my stew as opposed to the cornbread that they offer, which I'm sure was higher in fat. And, I don't eat gluten most of the time. And then they served it with a brownie. I chose not to eat the brownie. I brought little Lindt chocolates. I love them. They are bite size. And I had one of those for dessert instead. So really intentional, but also kind of working with what was available. And again, like not fearing kind of the outcome of that, I think was also really helpful. I obviously brought ginger candies. I use those throughout the hike. I use tummy drops. They're kind of my favorite ginger candy right now. And then also after meals, I did bring some over-the-counter stuff if I needed it, like Pepto. I did not end up needing it. But yeah, I mean, I was prepared and I was intentional about my choices. And I was kind of, stepping outside of some of the stuff that we would consider to be gastroparesis friendly, but it was done intentionally. And I was just incredibly happy to be doing it. But despite my best preparation, things happen, right? And we have to be adaptable. And so I realized at the end of the first day of hiking that I didn't quite bring enough food for the next day for the hike out. I ate more food than I thought I was going to eat as we were hiking. I was hungrier, and that's what my body needed. So, as I said, they have like a canteen and a little place where you can buy food there. I bought a bagel to bring with me the next day. I did have quite a bit of PB2 left, so I knew that I could put peanut butter, PB2 on the bagel, have, carbohydrates, have some protein, a little bit of fat. And I said, I don't usually eat gluten. I don't. But again, it wasn't something where I was like afraid. I don't have celiac disease. I just noticed like more bloating and like I don't feel as great when I eat gluten. But as I was saying, like I'm not really afraid of these sensations anymore. So I bought the bagel, brought it with me. And let me tell you, it was so good halfway up that hike to have a bagel with peanut butter. And I didn't eat the whole thing. I think, again, like using what we know about gastroparesis management is always helpful. And I knew like half was probably going to be best for me. And then I think I only ate half on the hike up, and then I ate the other half once we got to the top. And I had other food throughout the day that wasn't my only food, but just to, I don't know, to keep in mind that like when you are doing things like this, when you are even with the best planning, things happen and you kind of have to be adaptable. And I think knowing what is helpful for you, right? Like knowing these practical tips and tools is great because that helps you make decisions in the moment. And not having the fear around all of this, I think, is also really helpful because, there also could have been a situation where I was like, oh my God, the only thing I can get is a bagel and that has gluten. And am I not going to feel good? And if I eat this, am I going to, feel bad for the rest of the way up? And would not have helped my situation at all. I can almost guarantee that if I had spent a part of that hike, like, oh, I ate a bagel, do I feel bloated now, do I feel sick, like really looking and focusing on those symptoms, it would not have been as enjoyable. I may have found some sensations that like I wasn't even really noticing because I was just in awe of everything around us and the fact that like we were doing this, we were hiking up the Grand Canyon. For me, it's interesting. This did feel like kind of a triumph in terms of gastroparesis, certainly, but much more so for me in terms of anxiety. So I struggled with debilitating anxiety after my daughter was born in 2012. And um, not even around gastroparesis. I mean, just general health anxiety that was so debilitating. I mean, I was having multiple panic attacks every day. I could not leave my house. At one point, I was terrified to be home alone and I was terrified to leave my house. I mean, I was having panic attacks going to Target and the grocery store. And this was maybe, I don't know, 6 years ago at this point. And as my anxiety improved, my gastroparesis also improved, which like I don't think is a coincidence. Um, but to be doing this hike, having gotten to a place where I'm not afraid of gastroparesis anymore, I am truly living well, thriving with gastroparesis, and to be able to do this, to be at the bottom of the Grand Canyon when I couldn't even go to Target. I mean, it really cemented for me just how resilient we are as human beings and how much things change, like how our experience changes so much over time. I mean, I can think back to a time with the gastroparesis when like I was so sick, I couldn't work. I couldn't socialize. I couldn't sleep. I mean, my whole life was trying to get rid of this condition because I was so miserable and so sick and so terrified of what my life was going to look like with this condition. And, I mean, what an incredibly different life I am living now. Like, my experience is so different. And so it's really important for me to share these things because I know that there are people who are watching who are probably in that first place that I was just describing, who do feel utterly overwhelmed, just terrified and lost. And I think it's so important to say, like, that is not the only experience that's possible when we're living with gastroparesis. I mean, or anything else. If aside from gastroparesis, if you're struggling with anxiety, panic, again, like these things are so changeable. Our experience is so changeable, and there is so much more available to you. And if you can stay in the moment, right? And just, what do I need in this moment? And what do I need in this moment? Because from moment to moment, your experience is going to change. I promise. I promise that your experience will change moment to moment, and all of this will get easier. I promise. And there's so much help and there's so much support. And, I'll do it one more time. I will say, if you are in that place, like, please do at least check out my program. It is exactly why I made it, because the difference to me in what it means to live with gastroparesis or cope with gastroparesis and to truly thrive with gastroparesis is just, it's so huge. And it's available like to everybody. Like, a different experience is always available, truly. So I don't know. I hope you heard something in this. I hope, if nothing else, like maybe it was interesting. But I know that it's something that I have really wanted to share. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next time.